today. I would like to introduce Rabbi Seth and Rabbi Robin Frisch.
Robin's taking care of an issue between two of our children.
Okay. So to start this session, before we start this session, I understand everybody wants to be in the shade. If you move your chairs, just please continue to be socially distant from one another. We do have some road noise, so when you ask a question, please speak up so everyone can hear you. And I'm going to ask Rabbi Seth to introduce himself to everyone, and then this is going to be an informal meeting to start, and you'll teach us something, please.
Do you want me to start with that?
Whatever you're more comfortable. Introduce yourself, and then however you want to start.
Okay. Now, if any of you, can you hear me? Really?
Well, I got the back, but I want to sit in the shade.
Okay. I mean,
Okay, I can hear.
if you know, this reminds me, before I introduce myself, that sometimes at a wedding, or sadly at a funeral, I will make some announcements first, as you can imagine. And one of the announcements that I make is that often after one of these officiations, someone will come up to me and say, in a kind of a frustrated tone, "I didn't hear a word you said." So I always feel bad about that. And so I started to announce beforehand, if you can't hear me now in this announcement, then move up. Even with the spacing, we have space. Move up, and that way you won't get too frustrated. So if that happens, ladies and gentlemen out there, then just move up. Even while I or someone else is talking, it would be better to hear than to be frustrated, right? Yeah. Do you guys know each other? Yeah. Otherwise, I was going to socially distance you.
No, that's all right.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep my mask off now. But if we come a little bit closer, then I'll put it back on for all of our safety. And we of course understand that. So you guys, from what I understand, you're the congregation. And so I'm going to start by introducing my wife, Robin. Not this fellow who just raised his hand. He's not my wife, Robin. Although he seems very nice.
You don't know him yet.
I don't know, right. Yet is good. So this is my wife, Robin. Robin is also a rabbi. And she has a small synagogue in Philadelphia where she's the rabbi. It's part-time. But her full-time job, besides looking after me, which she does beautifully, is as the national director of the Rabbinic Fellowship Program for an organization that used to be called Interfaith Family, and now it's called 18 Doors. And that organization is working with the growing interfaith community in America, among American Jews and Jewish families. And I said this earlier, just so that we're clear, if what I understand from the statistics is correct, there are very few American Jewish families that don't have people who have either married in from the outside or undergone conversion into Judaism. It's very rare in 2020. And it makes it ever more important for us to engage with this community and find out how we can help, either coming into our community or being friendly enough so that we have good relations with that community and other communities. And that's very important work that Robin is doing, and very appreciated. Okay, so also, although I feel bad for your tape recording here, I'm going to repeat some of this. Forgive me.
I'll edit you.
Okay, you can edit it out. Right? I hope these stories match. We have 3 children, and our oldest is Benji, and he's studying to be an Orthodox rabbi. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be when he's ordained, it should be, right? We will be the first family in American Jewish history to have 3 ordained rabbis of the major Jewish movements in America in one family, one immediate family. And we're looking forward to that because I always wanted to be in the Guinness Book of World Records. So that could be my only shot that I'm aware of. Or what did Hamilton say? I'm not giving up my shot, right? Or something like that. Yeah. So we also have 2 other children that Robin just negotiated a little peace treaty between them while I was talking. We have Noah, who's our middle child, and he's 17, and he is our big driver. And Tali, who's just turned 14, and she wants to go to a party, a get-together with all of her friends, so she needs her brother to drive her. And so, what time is it right now? He's
11.
What time?
7 after 11.
7 after 11. So he won't wake up to go to drive her. So thanks for. I assume you took care of that, right? Did you tell him to wake up?
I told her.
Okay. So I should also mention, just as casually, that my middle son was supposed to go on Ramah seminar this summer, and it's if you go through the Ramah camping world, in your final summer you go to Israel, and so that guy, as you can imagine, with all the quarantines in Israel, that got canceled, and so like a big shot, I volunteered to take all the boys on a replacement summer experience, which I think is going to be a mistake, by the way. But I did it anyway, and we're leaving on Monday. Oh my God, we're leaving tomorrow, right? And so we're going, of all places, West Virginia. So wish me luck on this. I haven't been a madrich, a counselor in Ramah for many, many years. I was actually a unit head at Ramah Berkshires. Are any of you familiar with Berkshires? Were you there in 1980?
No, I was there for a Jewish singles weekend, actually.
Was it successful?
No.
No, okay. Don't give up.
Still on the market.
Okay, no, don't give up. It's good, it's good. And were you, what? No?
My grandchildren have gone to Vermont, and my son-in-law works for me.
Your son-in-law works? Wait, are you Rabbi's wife? No, because the Rabbi's son-in-law is Ramah Poconos.
He's the national business.
Say that again?
Jeffrey Goodman, he's the national business.
He's the national, what's his name?
Jeffrey Goodman.
Jeffrey Goodman.
Jeffrey Goodman? He sounds good.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm glad to make your acquaintance. Anyway, and then of course I'm a conservative rabbi, and I come to you as a conservative rabbi, and I don't know. I can't remember which story I gave them at this point.
That's great. If you'd like to give us Devar Torah quick,
okay,
and then
sure.
we'll open it up to questions.
Sure. So I was on my way up to Syracuse, New York this past week. You're probably wondering where this is going. Robin and I were actually marrying the former director of the Jewish schools in Philadelphia to his wife. And so was it Marshall, was I talking to you? Yeah. And so the wedding was to take place on Tuesday. Now I see some of you shaking your heads. Oh, interesting. So the good doctor says to me, "You're going to Syracuse," which is where I thought, what he thought he was going to ask, to do a wedding on a Tuesday? Almost challenging. So I said, well, it's the Jewish tradition that one should be married on a Tuesday. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. You did know that?
Yeah.
Did you get married on a Tuesday, though?
Yeah.
You did get married on a Tuesday? Wow. So it's also the custom, if you're moving homes, it's optimal to move on a Tuesday. So he says to me, very Jewishly, what? And I explained that in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, Bereshit, it's Tuesday, it's called the third day, is the day that God calls very good. And thus was understood in the Jewish tradition. It's the only day that's called very good. Even Shabbat's not called very good. Tuesday is. And so in the Jewish tradition, in the world of Yiddishkeit, Sephardic and Ashkenazic, recognized that if it's called very good, it must be the best day, in which to make transitions. So from, Ramah Berkshires to whatever transition, that's the day. And if you're moving from a house to a house, which is significant, because remember, a house is something that we leave with great reluctance. So much reluctance, I think many of you know, that if you move homes, then you can't take your mezuzah with you. Did you know that? And that's a sign of reluctance in leaving a home. Because once you leave a home, especially one that you've been through more than a few seasons, in a few years, there are memories left in that home, right? And any stage of life that you go through, whether you're going from being alone or single, even happy, to one in which you go to being married and all the wonderful things that come along with that, there are memories that you carry with you. You don't just say, oh, that was Monday, and I'm done with Monday. No, when you go to Tuesday, or any day, all the days that precede it are still with you. And I'm actually patting my heart here because everything that leads you up to this moment in life is part of who you are and part of that experience. Sometimes we even say things are bittersweet, right? So I explained that to the doctor, and then it occurred to me as part of the season that we're in right now, and this is a little bit of the davar. We are, as of last Thursday, in a very sad period of Jewish life. And this wedding, by the way, was just before that. It was on Tuesday, but on Thursday of last week was Shivas Rebbe Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. And if any of you recall this, let me just mention it. This is a time that, just as I said before about Monday and Sunday and every day preceding Tuesdays, this is a time that we carry memories forward to this moment. Shivas Rebbe Tammuz is the time in which the walls of Jerusalem were breached, and within a very few short weeks, 3 weeks, the time period we're in right now, 3 weeks, in which there are no weddings and a certain air of sadness, and people cut back on music and enjoyment in the summertime. Some people even stop eating fleisches, meat, because it's considered joyous. All of this is a reminder that we leave a certain amount behind, but we never forget it. And I think this is the importance of the time period that we're in right now. Because by the time we get to Tisha B'Av, which is probably 2 weeks from now, right? We are going to remember the destruction of the temple. And I was reminded of that in this wedding ceremony, because I don't know how many of you were under the chuppah at one point of your life, but it was the custom of Jewish men, grooms, that at the end of the ceremony, right? You see this, I'm sure you've seen this before, the groom, right? Do any of you recall what that is actually? What? No, but you can hear a million stories, but there's only one real one.
Destruction of the temple.
Destruction of the temple. In other words, here we are at our most joyous moment. Incredible when you find a life partner and you have so many hopes and dreams that you'd like to have fulfilled, right? And at the end of this ceremony, which hopefully the rabbi or the rabbis have said something good and nice and encouraging, all of a sudden the rabbi says to the groom, okay, now it's time to break the glass. And remember this incredibly sad moment in Jewish history that we mourn, we fast over it. Some even rip their garments. How is that possible? And the reason it's possible is because even though that is one of the saddest moments of life, and we're all going to experience, I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced setback, even some failures and all kinds of sadness. Everyone I know. But if it hadn't been for that destruction that we remember, and this time period in which we remember it, and the breaking of the glass at the joyous moment, if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't have really gone out in the world and gone forward in the world and arrived, as I say to a bride and groom, you two never would have met each other. We wouldn't be where we are today. And I think the greatest learning curve in the world is the learning curve of setback and failure. Because you learn from it, and you carry it. And that is the purpose of this time period of memory, not to drag you down. Even though you're fasting on certain days, it's not meant to drag you down, it's to help you remember so that you can pick yourself up after the breaking of a glass and say one of the most important phrases of the entire Jewish tradition. And I think you all know that when you break a glass, come on over here, there's plenty of room. Okay. I think the most important thing when you see the breaking of the glass is, what do Jewish people say? They say Mazel Tov. How can you say such a thing at a sad moment? The answer is, all of life is mingles joy and sadness, like our lives, but we pick ourselves up and we move forward into new chapters. And that's what I think about today. And you can thank the good doctor who seems to have gone off to the side after he told me that would be a good thing to talk about. So there you go. I don't know how many of you can hear me, but...
That's
Can you
Carl.
repeat the last thing you said, because there was a very loud noise.
So the last thing I said was, we pick ourselves up. That's why we say Mazel Tov at this very difficult moment. And have you not had a sad moment in your life? If you haven't had one, you haven't lived. But the best thing is to move forward. I think sometimes people say silver linings, but that's really not the whole story. It's the path ahead. It's the challenge of tomorrow. And that, and I celebrate that on Tuesdays. So there you
That's
go.
Carl. So with that, I'll open up to questions. Anyone has questions for Rabbi
So what he
Frisch?
just said, in case you didn't hear him,
Thank you. That was me speaking
that
up.
mask. He said, if anyone has any, correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone has any questions or, I don't know, anything. Oh, that's my daughter.
I'll start us off. Why us? Why do you want to come here?
Oh, well, when I realized that I should figure out what I was doing in my next chapter.
Why us is yes.
Oh, why us? Yeah. So I called, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the conservative rabbinate, of which I'm a member, we have an office in New York City. And so I was thinking, what should I do next? So I called them, to see if they had any suggestions. And they said, you know what, there's this shul in Long Island, in a place called Woodbury. Westbury. Yeah, see, I can't even remember it. I'm talking about memory and I'm losing it. So in Westbury, and it's very Hamish. Do you know what Hamish means? Yeah. So it's very Hamish, and you're Hamish, and maybe it could be a match, or as we say in Yiddish, a shidduch. And there's only one way to know, right? It's the same thing as dating. And to be a rabbi in a congregation, it's a lot like a marriage. You have to work at it. And I think that they saw there was some chemistry. So that's how I came to you. Yeah. Happenstance. You know what I've learned recently? There may not be many coincidences in life. I learned that.
So you saw on your resume that after being in a
Louder, Ronnie.
I'll repeat it. Yes.
You worked on creating something new.
I'll repeat it.
Why don't you stand up?
What can you tell us about that experience of creating this new something in today's crazy Jewish world that you can bring to the future
experimental.
Non-traditional, which is what I'm seeing about it. What's the learning curve, and what can you share with us about it?
Thank you for that. So I'm going to, I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm going to try and repeat it. So, what's your name? Ronnie asked, you've been in a traditional, what anyone would recognize as a synagogue. It's actually one of the oldest synagogues in America. You've been there, and you did that. And then you did something that looks a little bit more experimental or unusual, which was, let's call it a, for lack of a better expression, a startup. Yeah. I don't think I've actually used that before, but I'm going to use it now. And you've tried both of those things. What can you bring from that experience? I think she used the word learning curve. That could help us, right? Did I capture you?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
So did you hear what I said? Okay. So here's, I learned some things the hard way, which is okay, especially with what I told you before. I don't mind learning things the hard way as long as I actually learn something. If I learn something the hard way, or excuse me, if I don't learn something the hard way, that's painful. So when I went to the more traditional synagogue, the older one, I was told, you know, you should really bring in the missing demographic, the young people. And I said, okay. Because, you know, it had been the trend in America, which I think everyone knows, but I'll just repeat it, that young people were streaming into cities. Right? Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that. You know, they graduate from college, they move to the Upper West Side, you know. They get an apartment with 5 other people. They get a job that covers their rent and maybe some food. And that is what many synagogues saw or had seen as the gold mine. Especially synagogues that were watching the phenomenon called B'nai Jeshurun in New York City, also called BJ. Have you heard of it? Right? Because here's a synagogue that was a bombed out shell, metaphorically, in the 70s and the early 80s. And all of a sudden it came alive with huge influx of young people. And so for the past 20, 30 years, young people in Philadelphia too, were all over the country, were moving in and taking old structures and making them new again. So the synagogue that you referred to said to me, bring them in. And I thought, okay, because people were streaming in. And I did. That which I did is a course, a class in and of itself. And I'll tell you one of the ways that I did it was just to walk up to people who I thought were Jewish, which is risky these days, 'cause, you know. And I would say to this group of people, have any of you been on Birthright? And one person, at least one person was. And I would say, why don't you, did you hear me? Birthright? Yeah. I would say after engaging, and that's a key word there, engaging, how would you like to come to shul? And they looked at me like I was crazy. But shul is for old people. I said, well, you know, there's some places where shuls are for young people. And I would invite them and I would tell them that there was food at the end of the service. And that also, like, I would say, what was your favorite experience on Birthright? And they would always say, going to the kotel. You know, they would dance on Friday nights in the kotel and sing and all kinds of joyous things. They loved that. And I said, how would you like to recreate that here? And their expression often was, can we? There's only one way to find out. So this began a trend of those people and their parents and their grandparents and their aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings coming to shul. Because, you know, if you engage with someone, which I realize I'm using that word too much, but if you treat people with chesed, with kindness, people generally reciprocate. Not everybody, but in general, right? If I treat you nicely, there's a good chance, why would you treat me poorly, right? And then you give them a little nice, a little something to eat. It's a match made in heaven. And then I was expecting a medal on my chest. Like someone to say, oh my God, that was great. Because it was working. And it did work a little bit, but it also didn't work. So here's my learning curve. This initiative that I've just described to you, looking for a medal, waiting for people to throw garlands at me, was met with suspicion. Not overwhelming, but some. And the suspicion was articulated as, who are these people? Who are these people? And my response internally was, well, they're Jewish. But when you've been in a synagogue for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 1 year, and you've made your comfortable space, and all of a sudden new people come aboard, and you don't know them, and you don't know what your future will be on the deck of this boat. Will I have to move in and move over? It became clear to me that I did this almost solely. S-O-L-U-I. And my mistake that I didn't realize, my learning curve, was I needed leadership to be hand in hand with me. The people who sit in the pews, who go to the morning minyan, who come to the kiddush, who want their bagel just so. I wasn't able to engage them in this process. And it created a divergence. So much so that the new group became larger and more engaged, and the old group fell into a certain apprehension. And it caused a split. And so I went with the new group. And up until recently, it was going great. And then the virus hit.
The new group was the ones that formed this new
Yeah. And we called it New Shul because it was a new shul. But I kept a really good relationship with the old shul. I mean, it's not like, there was no enmity or anything like that. In fact, I'm very friendly. I still do, I'm sorry to say, I still do a lot of the funerals for these people, some of their weddings, and just a host of things. And I'm invited back. A lot of them still see me as the rabbi, but I put my energy into this new venture at that point. So that, now you're thinking, oh, look how bad that turned out. Well, I actually thought I learned huge lessons, important lessons that I think are important for this new chapter of my life as a rabbi. And anywhere I go, whatever my next chapter should be, and I'd love it to be here, just to be sure, but wherever I go, it's going to be hand in hand with everybody, not just me going and engaging with one or two or three. And that's very important to me, and I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah. Oh, yes. Tell me your name, I'm sorry. Marilyn? Marilyn.
I've been there for 54 years.
3 times 5.
There you are. And my daughter was new there. That's when we joined. But looking around here, quite a few of us no longer live in the area, but are very involved within the temple. The community around us, the temple, has changed drastically. Asian, Black, all that. It's going to be very difficult to get membership from the community. It's not that many. Looking at us, a lot of us don't live around here, but we feel strongly about the temple. But where are you going to get this new blood that's going to want to be a part of it? We're all on board over these years, because this has been our life, has been the temple. But you don't find that.
I know.
Okay, you gotta repeat what she said, because we didn't hear anything.
Exactly.
You have to repeat what she said.
Oh, okay.
Because we didn't hear it.
All right, so Marilyn said, I'm going to try to make it a little bit more upbeat though, Marilyn. I'm going to change your trope a little bit. Okay. Marilyn said, in a disparaging, dirge-like way, almost like, I want to show you what the wise men of Chelm would do. They would wring their hands, right? And they would discover that they had a crisis when they learned the word. So, Marilyn, you are not the first shul in the world to undergo demographic change. Whether it's linear or cyclical, that jury's still out. And I know that there's a lot of wise men of Chelm all over Long Island. Let's be honest. But remember what I said about people streaming into New York City? Young people? Well, I've got news for you. And I'm not brilliant, so take this for what it's worth. The same thing that caused me to have the learning curve recently with the virus has now thrown city life into disarray. Disarray. And so you, like other Long Island communities, are going to get a second look by people that you never suspected in the last 20 years. You're going to get it. Now, the question is not whether you're going to get a second look. That's definitely going to happen. The question is, how are you going to make the warmth of your synagogue that you feel apparent externally? How are you going to say, anyone coming to have a look at us is not going to be viewed with suspicion, but is going to be viewed with open arms? How are you the people, and the leadership, and the Klei Kodesh, the rabbi, the cantor, the educational people, how are we going to meet the second look? Now you might think, oh, that's all pie in the sky, but there are a lot of market forces that are telling me that it's not the somber tone by which you frame the question, but it's how we optimistically view the future. And if you can do that, look, how do you build anything? How did I build that? One by one. One by one. I walked up to one person in a group at a cafe. And I'm not a Pied Piper. You want to know the truth? I'm a little scared of walking up to people in a cafe. But that's what not only the rabbi has to do, like I said before, it's what we all have to do. Everyone is an ambassador, an honored position within the community. You love this community, Marilyn, like you said?
I don't live here anymore.
No, but do you love this shul?
Without a doubt.
Okay, so here's something else I learned, which I'll just throw gratuitously in there. I went to school for a significant part of my life at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which is not a seminary. It's an actual university in Jerusalem. And it's world class. It's well known. Here's what I discovered. People from the neighborhood don't go to the school there. They draw on far and wide. You say, no, but we want people from the neighborhood to walk to shul with the talis and the children. Okay, that's not necessarily where we're at right now. But Hebrew University developed something besides their alumni, which is something we need to think about. But they developed something called American Friends of the Hebrew University, which is not just fundraising. It's anyone that's been touched by this community. I think you said your daughter was married here? Did you say that? Yeah. Did you say that?
Yeah, all my kids were married.
Okay, so they may live far and wide. I don't know where they live. Kansas?
One in Kansas, one in New York.
Beautiful. They are still the friends of this shul. They are the friends of this shul. And we, leadership, we need to tap into that. Because you're not going to find enough people here in the immediate future in this neighborhood that are going to be able to walk with their talis bags in their children. So you need to now look on a wider scale. And understand that what comes out of your sanctuary is not just 7 pews up and 4 pews that way. It's the world based on the warmth that you generate here and the product called Yiddishkeit that you have here. And you have a pretty good product. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here today. You're not just voyeurs on the life of a visiting candidate rabbi. You have a stake in the future. Okay, let's exercise that stake. But it's It's not easy. But I'm not, when I say it's not easy, I'm not the wise men of film. I'm being as sagacious as I could possibly be about the future. So we'll see. Did you want to?
Oh, we have time for one more.
Looking at your resume, I was questioning, you founded a new shul in 2018.
I think she didn't hear us. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Louder, Wendy.
You founded a new shul in 2018. Why are you looking for another job?
The reason is, which I said earlier, I have a feeling you didn't hear. Were you able to hear earlier? No. Okay, so I'll just project it this way. Forgive me. Yeah. So it was going pretty well, very well. And then when you heard about the virus, right? So a lot of my young people went home. And when I say young, I mean people even in their 40s. They went home with their spouses and their children. And what I mean by home is their parents. And that put a damper on our gatherings because demographically they cleared out of the cities that I tried to explain earlier they've been clearing into in the last 30 years. And then their parents, who I also relied on, that they joined us. I hope I'm giving the same story. Their parents also didn't come out. So if their kids went home, the parents stayed home, and no one went out, and it literally dried up all of our programming. And sadly, our budget process, our future planning, and things look really bleak in March. Yeah, March. And I'm going to add something else, which I never expected, and somewhat flies in the face of what I've been telling you. Our Zoom classes skyrocketed, which tells me there's some unwritten history here of what I've just created with all these people, and thought we were on a, not just a downward slope, but just cashing in our chips, if you'll forgive that expression. I have two rabbis or rabbinical students that are going to take over whatever remnants, and they're going to live. But it's going to be a vastly different experience. And if this ever clears up, God willing, then it will probably, but it's going to take a lot of demographic shifting. Somewhat of the stories and anecdotes that I've shared with you, it's going to take this is a new expression for me, tectonic demographic shifts. People are going to have to come back into the city again, and people are going to have to want to come out again, and parents who often were the money behind their children's forays into Judaism are going to have to want to come out again as well. I'll tell you this. I had a long talk, this is kind of anecdotal and kind of interesting, with some of my young people about making what we were doing happen. And I explained, look, we can give a great sermon, we can tell a great story, we can share incredible life experiences, we can say Kaddish together, we can do all these things. But one of the important things that we have to do is put money on the table. We have to pay for electricity, for rent, for our prayer books, for our printing, for our musicians, for me, for all these things. We have to put money on the table. You know, it says in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Sages, if there's no flour, there's no bread. So, I had people that were doing incredibly well in their businesses or in their work. They said, well, what do you need the money for? I said, we need the money for everything. They said, oh, how much do you need? Oh, here's one. How much did this service cost? This is a young person speaking. In a group of many young people. How much did this service cost? I never thought about it such a way. I said, well, there was the rent for the hall, there were the musicians, and we did printing of our own siddur. So I kind of added up in my head, and I said, and the food. I said, well, for all of us, it was like 70 people there. So for all of us, I would say $1,200. Literally, in Yiddish, Affenling, Affenzing. I'm not talking out $1,200. So all of these young people took out their phones and they Venmoed over to me, all of them, $1,200 each. I said, no, it just costs $1,200. I'd never been asked that question, and I never expected that response, but this is the way they think. And we, in terms of the leadership of any community, we have to think too. We have to think, how do you, in a world of fewer dollars, expanding pandemics, difficulty in demographics of neighborhood and city and townships and things like that, how do we support the place that we feel that we have a stake in, not just today, but tomorrow? How do we buy the bagels that we want to serve at Dominion? And all of that was important for this consideration, which I wanted to add earlier on today. These are learning curves that I never thought about, but they're important. People don't like talking about money, but it's important. Oh, okay. Yeah. And so, this Venmo thing, before all this happened, I had heard of Venmo, but who knew? Anyway, I'm sorry.
I was wondering, what would you have liked us to ask you?
I think I wanted you to ask me exactly what you asked me. I mean, I realize that's a little cheesy to say that, but it's actually true. It's like, ask me where things have gone like this. I could say to you, did any of you grow up or when you were growing up watch the show Leave It to Beaver? Remember that show? Does anyone here not see the show Leave It to Beaver? Marilyn, did you see the show Leave It to Beaver? Right? So I grew up kind of in a Leave It to Beaver world. My mom used to vacuum with a house coat and pearls. It was the only jewelry she owned, but, And, my father came home. He didn't wear one of those smoking jackets, but he did, he would smoke a little cigar. And life was good, and at the time, I don't know if you know this, but they were graduating rabbis, from the seminaries and from the yeshivas, and they would go out to Long Island, and they would throw out some cinder blocks on a place in Long Island, and they would build a shul. And, a few people would get together, and then everyone would come. That was that world, right? That world is what I consider this. And I can tell you how I grew up that way, and it was a wonderful experience. My parents, they loved each other, they loved us. It was a Leave It to Beaver world in many respects. It's not the world that I became an adult in. So the world went from being a beautiful stream, that song, Merrily, Merrily, Merrily. Yeah, it didn't turn out that way. It turned out with twists and turns and life. Some people, by the way, this is kind of funny, in my opinion. When I go to Robin's shul, they say, oh, what should we call you? Like, what do you call the husband of a rabbi? They ask me all the time, what should we call you? Well, no, I just said, you call me Lucky, And so, who would have thought when I was a kid that I would grow up and marry a rabbi? And I would be the rabbitson in her shul. So anyway, yes.
So I have a question. I'm Randy.
Randy, did you say?
Randy, yes. I'm trying to be loud enough. So not only has this shul spread out geographically, but the composition has changed over the years. It's no longer young families with 2.2 children. We've got, couples, singles, all sorts of things. How do you visualize kind of bringing all the different populations back in and attracting on top of that to serve all those different needs?
Well, if I had a great answer, then I would be a great rabbi. So I'm going to just choose to be a good rabbi today. And I'm going to say something that I said earlier, and that is, it's all about being human. And what does human mean? That makes us different than a lot of other things. Other animals, other things in the world. What makes us human is that we desire to be with each other. I think I studied these texts in graduate school called social animal. And Jews are no different. We want to be with each other. And of course, the hindrance is the pandemic that we're experiencing, but we want to be with each other. And even though you say, oh, it's the demographics have shifted, I'm aware of that, the 2.2 children thing and all that. Alavai, it should happen. But right now we have people that are single parent families. We have LGBTQ. We have all kinds of, not fragments, that's kind of negative, but we have different variegations on life that weren't covered in Leave It to Beaver. So the only thing that a rabbi can do in concert with leadership, and then really everyone, because if everyone's not in this, then we're sunk. It's just it's kind of like that must be the rabbi's people again. There has to be the opportunity for engagement, and it's limited right now. But I promise you, it's not going to be that way forever. I told one of the earlier groups, my cousin was Jonas Salk, and before that, no one was letting their children out of the house, right? No one. It was considered not pasnished, it was considered dangerous. We will get to a point where we will be back together again. And the question is not what constituency you are in this shul of shuls, but how do we reassemble the Jewish, what's the Jewish idea? It's not, Ward and June Cleaver, it's mishpacha. How do we reassemble? And we will, because out of the sanctuary, out of the classrooms, out of the activities, out of the programs, out of things, we're going to make sure that people mix with each other. And the rabbi, whoever that rabbi is, God bless him or her, that person will have to be the very pilot of getting people back together again. So I don't want to paint this like the wise men of film. I want to paint this as we will get back to that. And when we do, let us be ready to show the world the warmth that really is endemic and part of our shul, as it always has been, but now it's changing and unfolding and enveloping. Yeah, that's good. I didn't even think of that before. Unfolding and enveloping. We have to show the world that. And they will come. What do they say in that movie? If they build it, we come. If we nurture it, it will grow. Trust me.
And I was really asking, going forward post-pandemic.
Oh, okay, good.
Obviously, it's a different thing to navigate during.
So Randy, I promise you, this chapter will end and a new chapter will begin.